Welcome to everyone who's part of this discussion today. My name is Meghdut Roy Chaudhary. I represent Techno India Group, which is one of the largest educational groups in the country with almost 100,000 students across its schools, colleges, and universities. And I represent the power of the youth, right? I represent the voice of the youth. I think one of the biggest things that's missing in rooms like the ones we're sitting in is, in fact, that there aren't enough young people in rooms like this. There's an abject lack of loop feedback mechanisms where we institutional leaders, I think we're the ones at fault in general, is because we institutional leaders are not taking enough feedback from the ones whom we are serving, because at the end of the day, we're serving our students, right? And they are our primary customers. Although some might say that it's the parents who are paying, so they are the customers, but the ones who are in the classrooms are the customers. So one of the inherent points I want to raise today is the fact that institutions are actually racing not against other institutions. So it's not just like Indian institutions are racing against other Indian institutions or institutions abroad. I think they're racing against the internet. Because the rate at which the amount of knowledge or the amount of information that's available to the average young person on his phone with an unlimited data pack, you are trying to combat that with somebody in your classroom who is reading off of a PowerPoint presentation from his laptop, and that's doing injustice to students in general. If we were to go out and ask our students in classrooms, hey, is this what you believe is the best way to learn? In most probably, they would say, probably not. Probably learn a lot more from watching YouTube videos, Or there's so much interesting content on the internet now. I had a very interesting example the other day. So I organized a lot of innovation meetups for entrepreneurs in my city. I come from Kolkata, very passionate about my city of Kolkata, and I work very, very hard to try and build a collective voice of the youth there, particularly in and around education and entrepreneurship. And I met this very young boy who I asked a question about Web3 and Metaverse, which is the future of the internet, right? The internet is changing, and I asked him a question about something, and it was a room of 120. This kid, raised his hand, and he said something, and I was blown away by his answer because I did not know the depth to which he knew that. And at the end of saying that, I said, what's your name? He's like, oh, you didn't recognize me. I'm one of your students. I dropped out of one of your colleges, 3 years ago. I'm like, what do you do now? He's like, I am a community creator for Meta, for Facebook, and where I do walkthroughs of videos, and I game. I am a gamer, and I have 1.5 million followers on Facebook. And he's a college dropout, right? That got me thinking. I'm like, you know what? I'm basically a gatekeeper of education. We run so many schools, colleges, and universities. And our kids are running out. It's not even that, our colleges are actually really good. They're at the top tier. We're very well accredited. There's lots of, smart young people coming into our classrooms. But maybe, are we doing them enough justice? Why did the kid have to drop out of college in order to pursue his interests? And he's doing much better than a lot of our other students who are currently in college now, right? And he wanted to come back and be a role model for some of these other students. Another interesting point I want to bring in here, which is I was talking to another startup. Again, I keep going back to innovation because I guess as Chief Innovation Officer, this is one my job, and two is that's a sector that I understand a little bit. So I was talking to one of these big organizations which work with lending. It's a lending platform for institutions so that it's easier for the institutions to collect the fees from the parents. So I was talking to the founding team, and I asked them, what kind of challenges do you normally face? And this brings in another whole different angle. He said that, when we meet the promoters of the institutions, usually it goes really well because they understand the needs of the institution. They understand the need of collaboration within institutions to make their processes within the institutions more efficient. But every time we're talking to academics, we face a huge roadblock. And that's scary for me. That's almost, so we are seeing that in the way that the education system is poised, and as the representative of a large group of institutions, we feel that if academics are the ones who are becoming gatekeepers and not in a positive way for education, wherein all the possible amount of collaboration that could be had at an institutional level is being stopped or is being postponed because they sometimes do not understand the need for it, or they do not understand how efficient it would make their own institutions. that becomes an impediment for the growth, and the ones who suffer at the end of the day are students. So I'll let those be my first set of opening words, and I have 3 seconds left still, and hopefully would love to hear from the rest of the audience and their efforts, and come back to questions, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you so much. What I loved about that was talking about, that actually we are competing for attention against social media for our students. So actually, we've got to make something really good, innovative and interesting for them to take part in education. I think that's a really good point. I think the question is where they're learning from. Is it accurate? That's one of the challenges of social media that we can come on to. But let's go straight over. Miriam Bonilla, you're from Edibon and you're the Council Treasurer of World DIDDAC Association. So it'd be great to hear your views.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm glad you are here and thank you for your time and in this last session. Well, let me explain to you 2 things first, just so you can understand what I want to explain. I'm the CEO from Edibon. Edibon is a technical teaching equipment manufacturer. We like to say that we are in the middle of the industry and the education. We look how the industry works, and we do in equipment in a lab scale so that the educators can use the same tools that the industry is demanding. That's one of my roles. The other one is that I'm part from the council from the World DIDDAC, and I'm the treasurer. And World DIDDAC Association is an association of educational providers, okay? So what are the 2 things that I want to say here? You talk about digital and you talk about scaling the education. I can say to you something. First of all, digital and digitalization, for my perspective, you can democratize the education. That means that you make the education more affordable for much more people, because it's not as costly as it can be when you need to go physically. I'm coming from the technical education, from the engineering point of view. When you have the tools, and nowadays it's possible to have the tools that you can perform the practical experiments online, that means that you don't need to invest in the equipment. That means that anybody from any place in the world, or in any city or a small town in India can learn engineering. And engineering and technical education is one of the main keys for a country to be developed. That's one thing. And the other thing is that we are talking about making the education vocational. I really do think that we should look at the industry, because when a parent wants, when they send their kids to the school, they want them to get a job, okay? So that's the main target we have. We want them to be educated, to have a good job, okay? And being good persons also, but having a good job is good. So the thing is that if we look at the industry, they will demand the labor from tomorrow. So we need to talk to them to say, okay, what do you need? What kind of skills are you looking at? Are you looking at something, or maybe some persons that are good in programming, or are you looking some persons good in certain technology? So we need to talk to them, because they are the ones that are going to use the results of our education. So with these 2 things, if we make things digital, and we talk at the industry, and we let the industry get involved in the education, I think we can get much more success. Nowadays, the main issue, and mainly for the technical education, that is my part, the main issue right now is that there is a very big gap between when someone finalizes their degree or their school and what they need in the industry. So in the industry, they need to retrain the people again, because they don't know. So let's merge this, and then let's put the industry inside the education. So in that way, we will be sure that what we are working today, we will have the results, and they will get employed in the future. So that's why many of big companies are getting much involved even in the kindergarten. Why? Because they want to train the people to have certain skills that they will require in 18 years' time. So that is one of the things, the two things, make things digital. For sure, also physical is good, but digitalization makes things easier and more affordable for most of the people. And the other thing is that we have to talk more with the industry so we can join forces to be sure that we will have the proper people trained to have a job when they finish. So I'm having 20 seconds more, so thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I was fascinated there, and I think it's absolutely right, starting from the very youngest age, from nursery, helping children understand, how to work some of the skills. And I think we've all probably seen in our time some toddlers collaborate better than sometimes in some working environments we've seen happen. So I think that's definitely something to work from. I'm really excited. Our next speaker, I think, will give a really interesting perspective because she's been living in India for 5 years, as well as having lots of experience from elsewhere. It's Miss Michelle Wade, who's the Commissioner for South Asia from Global Victoria.
Thanks, Caroline, and it's great to be here this afternoon. I'm not sure if any of you heard me speak earlier in the week at the earlier conference in the city, but for those of you who don't know me, I represent the state of Victoria. Australia is very well known for its role in particularly international education, and Victoria is a key provider to that. Of the Indian students who choose to study in Australia in any year, about half choose Victoria, and we have the most leading universities in our state, as well as organisations who are doing major research, like the Australian Council of Education. They've been around since 1930. And agents like IDP, who people think is a big international company, was actually founded in Australia, based out of Victoria, and I'm really watching what they're doing in transformation of student recruitment and ongoing involvement in a young person's education journey. So I come here today, as Caroline said, with Australian experience, and that experience is being a parent. I've got 3 children, so this is where Megat and I are going to disagree a bit about who makes the decisions on education. I come to you as someone who's been on the board of an educational institution up until I left Australia, and that was the major provider of music education into Australian schools. So I'm also watching that organisation transform at this point of time. And then I think for those of you who have ambition, who are running institutions and who want to engage with international institutions, the other perspective I bring and the work that I do day to day in representing the Victorian businesses and institutions here is I come with the mindset of what's in it for them. Is it viable for them to participate in India? What makes it worthy to give up resources, opportunity cost, to come up here and deliver and participate? And I always, as you're going through the international collaboration parts of the national education policy, want you to think about, is it viable for the other people we want to bring in and be involved? So from a point of view of digital transformation, I just wanted to mention, I think it's an incredibly interesting time. I watch with fascination with my daughters who've been at university through the pandemic in Australia, one doing a much more formal degree in languages and public sector that was easy to transform into digital. The other, lucky thing, doing a beautiful degree in sculpture at a leading arts college, and how that was almost impossible to transform to digital. For me, in my mind, in the 5 years that I've been in India, there's been moments probably in the last 3 years where I've looked out the window of the car at a guy in the back of a truck and thought, wow, I never thought he would have a smartphone. And I just think it is such an interesting time, not just about how we teach people to, or that people have access, but how people learn. One of the things, and this might be funny for me to mention with Miri, I didn't know I would be sitting with a Spaniard, was I spent 6 years in Spain with the federal government, but I used to cover Portugal. And Portugal's a country of about 10 million people. And I would go across from Spain to Portugal, and the Portuguese would always say, we can talk in English, but the Spanish, they don't speak so well in English. And when we got to why, it was because the Portuguese didn't dub their television. So everything on their TV was said in English and had the subtitles in Portuguese. And they said, that's why we can speak better language. We're learning by osmosis. And this has always made me think, what if we manage smartphones the right way, for the people who are at risk of being left behind here in India, what could they learn? You'll remember through the pandemic, whenever we turned on or whenever we made a call for a while, we were getting the health messages, which was really fascinating for me because often they were in a language that I couldn't understand. But what would happen if every time someone turned on their phone, if something was set up with Airtel or with Geo, that people got some sort of learning, that there was a focus and a move forward on literacy or on numeracy? What if once a video hit a certain number of viral hits, you could choose what language you wanted to read the subtitles in to again try to impact that learning? So I do think the potential in learning is incredibly exciting, and I hope I've given you a few sort of new ways to look through that lens. Thank you.
I think that's really exciting, thank you. And actually, in Britain at the moment, we have, not just for foreign language learning, which we're notoriously bad at, but actually for English, we have a scheme now where everyone's being encouraged to turn on the subtitles for programming, actually from a literacy point of view, to help children. If you're listening and seeing, it just goes in, just helps it go in. So I think that's a really important point. Okay, our final speaker, I'd like to welcome Rowan Kennedy, who's Deputy Director of India for the British Council.
Thanks, Carolyn. It's really good to be here, and I've caught not all of the conference, but I've really enjoyed the bits that I have caught. So the British Council, hopefully many of you will know us. We're the UK's international organisation for cultural relations and educational opportunities. We're on the ground in around about 100 countries worldwide, including obviously here in India, one of our priorities. We work in arts and culture, in the English language, but we also do a lot of work in education with universities, with colleges, with schools right across the world to support better teaching and learning through building partnerships with the UK, through sharing best practice. In India, we have 4 offices. I'm based in Delhi. We also have offices in Mumbai, Chennai, and Kolkata. But of course, our programming is available increasingly online for anyone, anywhere in the country. We were joking before this session that bureaucrats and diplomats are very good at agreeing with each other, not disagreeing. I'm going to agree a little bit with actually everything my fellow panelists have said. But I'm also going to try and bring some slightly different perspectives. So in the digital, on the question of sort of digital and the role of digital, I mean, Roy is right. You know, there is a competition essentially between traditional education and kind of what people can get from their smartphones. And I think one of the challenges for education in general at the moment is just simply the pace of change. Right, that change is happening so fast globally, driven by you know, factors including the rise of the internet, of smartphones, the kind of pervasiveness of smartphones. So actually, you know, how do you keep what kids are learning in the classroom now? How do you make sure that's relevant for them? You know, not just kind of when they graduate, but even in a couple of years time. And I think, you know, that's the same anywhere. Different countries obviously deal with that at different paces, and the lag is different for different countries. I think on the question of scale, you know, and scale and digital, I mean, we, like a lot of, you know, like most institutions, like most organisations in the British Council, when the pandemic happened, we kind of retreated. Oh, thank you. I don't know if that was audible in the hall, but there was a really nasty buzzing here on stage. we kind of obviously had to start doing everything online. But what we found kind of coming out of the pandemic now is that we're not abandoning that sort of digital, and what works best for us when we work with schools, when we work with universities, whether it's with teachers, whether it's working directly with students, is a kind of hybrid model. So it's to offer people kind of both ways of interacting with us. But our way really of thinking about kind of working at scale, and this is, it's a challenge we've been wrestling with for a while in the British Council generally, but particularly here in India, where the scale is so vast. How can you be relevant if you're trying to kind of create positive change, create impact at scale? The way we're looking at that is really through trying to work at the kind of systemic level. So rather than working with individual institutions, rather than working with individual teachers, we're trying now to work at the systemic level. So for example, we've been doing a lot of work with CBSE, Central Board of Secondary Education, to support their shifting in ways of assessment, to support the way they look at kind of teaching and learning core skills. And we're doing that at that central level because we know that, not only are there kind of 25,000 CBSE schools right across India, but that also their best practice will kind of be replicated then in other schools. And obviously, we've done a lot through kind of cascade models. You can do a bit through cascade models, but I think what we found is after a while, actually, the cascade kind of starts to lose its effectiveness. So for us, really, scale is about that kind of blended mix, the sort of hybrid face-to-face bit, but it's also about kind of trying to work where we can at the systemic level.
Thank you so much. Some brilliant insights from our panel there. I've got lots of questions I want to ask, but I'm going to reserve some of those. I might make moderators' prerogative to ask some questions in a second. But what I'd like to do is come out to the audience. I know there'll be lots of questions, so what I suggest I do is I'm going to take 3 questions from the audience, then I'm going to put them to the panel, and then we'll go from there. There's a gentleman with his hand up straight away in the middle, so we'll get a mic to him. Anybody else? Can I see some hands with questions? We'll start off there. Thank you, sir.
How this education to all is a slogan for today's this session. How it will be possible to disseminate to tribal areas, the rural areas, as the network and the transportation facility at present is not available at all at these places. Then how this education to all will work?
Thank you. Excellent question. Any other questions? There's a lady over there. Thank you.
First of all, thanks to all the panelists who shared their immense wisdom. So I like to ask my question on a wide range of social media was observed. So most of them were used 1 to 7 hours per day. Is it good to use social media? Will it make the child or the students to grow in their career path? Please explain. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I'm loving these questions. They're really to the point and punchy. So actually, I think they're great. So let's just start off. I mean, guys, I'm not even going to moderate you. Who wants to talk first and just go for it?
Hello. Okay. So about the question for the rural areas, that happens in many, many countries. I mean, back in Europe, we have it easy because it's easy to access the education or the educational center. But in some areas, it's very difficult because they don't have the way to go to the school or they don't have the money to go to the school. So digital and the digitalization is making all these things change. Now, internet, let's say, is very affordable and even can be paid by the government, so these kids can access any kind of content and they can learn about anything. For example, I have a 7-year-old daughter. She's learning programming with an app. She thinks she's playing, but she's learning programming. So the way my daughter is doing back in Madrid can be done here in a very rural area of Kerala. Okay, they can learn how to program. So for that, they are learning in a very easy way. And I mean, I think you agree with me that kids are more used to use the iPads and the mobile phones. So whenever you have in the mobile phone or in the iPad, they learn very fast. So with this digitalization, you are getting nearly to every single rural point of in the earth. So that's the key for the future, in my perspective.
There's something I want to talk about as well in terms of, far-reaching education and getting it out into the rural areas, because it's even an issue that we're facing here at the moment with a technical product in another area in India. So I just want all of you guys who are involved in the good thoughts in this sector to keep this in mind. One of the problems that we're facing is that in Australia, some of our technologies are moving faster in some industries than your technologies are. We're phasing them out. You're still using them here, and we're not able to service them properly. So in your planning and in the government planning, I'd suggest, and with any commercial relationships that you form, Bangalore's going to move a lot faster than somewhere up in the northeast. You're going to have to make sure that people don't lose out because of redundancy of technology, and that there's long agreements for technology servicing.
Just to add on to that point, I think the accessibility of education is something that we institutional leaders really struggled with during COVID as well. Even if I take the example of our group, we have campuses in very far-flung districts of Bengal, in Jharkhand, in places where it's hard to pronounce the names of even. We really saw that what helped was community leadership in a lot of times, where the teachers took the onus upon themselves, or the principals took the onus upon themselves, where they would create these little hubs where they would, sort of pool a couple of devices together and help teach in parts and do the same thing over and over again. So here, I think the community leadership played a much bigger role. The only difference that it comes to is the access to infrastructure. On the access to infrastructure point is the amount of spending, which again becomes a public need. It has to come from the government, or in a lot of cases, organizations like Google, who've been able to provide access in very smaller towns. I think it's a recurring problem. I think if we ever have another pandemic, it will still be a problem then, as it was a problem in the last time. If I may go to the social media point, I think I'm a digital native, right? As a digital baby, we understand social media, and I think I'm happy to fight anybody who says social media is more of an evil than good, because even if we look at the kind of careers that are available today, if we look at the creator economy, if we look at the boom of this economy, which has given rise to stars who today have gone on to become celebrities almost just because of the way that they apply makeup on their face, or just in the way that they are able to interact and give little nuggets of information, be it financial, be it educational, from their mobile phone, sitting at home with one light on their side. I have personally met thousands of such content creators who've gone on to become influencers and gone on to, and of course they have a responsibility. We can have, that's a completely different conversation, that you're giving the baton of educational content to people on the ground. But that's important as well. That's democratization of education. If people are spending 7-8 hours on social media, that's because you cannot change the tide of the world. You cannot change the way that the fish swims. If that is the way that because it's also super interesting, right? I think it's almost Darwinian, the way that social media works. Of course, it's addictive. All of us, in our own ways, be it WhatsApp University, be it Instagram, be it Snapchat, and for a lot of us, LinkedIn maybe, because it gives you validation so fast. It's very easy to get hooked onto it. But at the end of the day, it's also democratization of education that way, that if the content is good, and if you can, convince your audiences sitting in front of you, even if you're in a tiny village of India or in Namibia or in Zimbabwe or in Tanzania, it does not really matter, because you're able to grasp the attention of the audience, and if you're able to convince them to buy a product or a service, or to lead a better life, or to put makeup a little bit better and use better products, so be it, right? We can't really change the way that the world works.
I agree. I think that the question about is social media good or bad? I mean, it's here, isn't it? And it's not going away very very fast. For me, the real question about that is it's about kind of information literacy, and can we Can we help to teach people how to engage with the information that they see online? Because it's, you know, it's not moderated, it's not, well, in many cases it's not moderated. You've got kind of all sorts of information out there. It's about how to kind of understand that, how to work out what is from a reliable source and what isn't, and how to make judgments on the quality and the source of the information you're getting and the motivation of the people who are sharing it. That for me is the kind of big question with social media. And on the question about rural areas, I think, you know, as Miriam said, digital is going to be a big part of it. But I think what we learned in many places in the pandemic was actually more old school methods of communication can sometimes work as well. You know, don't forget TV, don't forget radio, because these were being used very successfully in many parts of the world where, you know, there aren't enough laptops for kids to study on, there aren't enough smartphones for kids to study on. And I have to agree with some of the things that were being said earlier about, you know, just the value of dubbing, of subtitling rather than dubbing content on TV. I was fortunate enough to spend some of the earlier parts of my career in Russia and in Kazakhstan, where everything is dubbed, nothing is subtitled. And the difference I've seen between parts of the world where there's subtitling and parts of the world where there's dubbing in terms of the quality of English people speak is massive. So, you know, let's not forget the old school methods as well.
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the key points. We talk about technology, but it doesn't have to be expensive. You know, you can do some quite simple techniques that can really, really help support learning. Fantastic, thank you so much. Can we come back out to the audience, if we can see any hands for the questions? I have a gentleman at the front here, and then actually make people work, then there's some arms at the end. I want to make sure we go to the back. A gentleman who's, yes, standing up at the back, and a gentleman at the front.